Well, thank you all for coming. I'm Madhu, as we just said, and I'm here to talk about a project that I've been working on for the last year, which is called Stories from My Grandmother's House. And Stories from My Grandmother's House is a virtual reality project that allows me to travel to my grandmother's house in Haifa, in Palestine, in the 1930s. And it's intended to hold space for my heritage and be able to experience it as if it's a memory. And so it allows me and you to experience places and stories that we otherwise might not be able to access in a way that kind of feels hopefully a little bit like we're actually there. And it's inspired by kind of old family stories across around about 300 years from both the Armenian and the Palestinian side of the family. So for the session, I wanted to take you through some of the methods that I used to develop the project. And then we'll have time for a Q&A, and then after that I've got 2 headsets, so everyone will be able to watch at least one kind of scene from the project, and maybe a little bit more than that as well, if we have time. So, my grandfather was Armenian, and he was from a small town in the mountains of modern-day Turkey called Zeytin. And my grandmother was Palestinian, and she was from Haifa. And so for people who grow up in the kind of diaspora of different cultures, there's often this need to find home, or to find and to build an identity and a heritage, especially if you haven't grown up with that side of the family. I'm going to put her on the spot now. I grew up with my mum, who's from New Zealand, who is sitting over there. And when I grew up with her here, but when I was growing up, I had this kind of really clear vision of what the house looked like, but I'd never been there. And we went back together, and we went to the house, and we knocked on the door, and we were kind of hoping that they might be in and that we might be able to maybe say hi and say who we were. And we knocked on the door, and they weren't in. So we went and we tried the side gate, and it turned out that the side gate was open. So we opened the side gate, and we walked around the back into their garden, and we were sort of having a look at the garden, and my mum was explaining how it was at the time, and then we walked up onto the back deck, and we were having a little sort of peer through the back windows of the house, and then the neighbour popped their head over the fence and was like, "Who are you?" "Who are you?" You know? And my mum was just like, "Oh, you know, it's fine. I used to live here in the 1950s." And the neighbours didn't look particularly impressed by this, so we left fairly quickly after that. But with the other half of my heritage, there's always been this kind of sense of wanting to break into it and to go digging and to really kind of engage with it and find more. But up until a couple of years ago, the only real information that I had was that my grandmother's family, or my grandmother I thought was from Haifa, and I didn't really know anything else about them. And on my grandfather's side, obviously, it's very hard to trace due to some reasons that will become clear if you do watch the VR project. But yeah, because, you know, and also because of the Armenian genocide and his family basically being killed or deported via Aleppo, we don't really have any information about that side of the family. But just because you don't have any information doesn't mean you don't necessarily try. So, oh, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong one. That was supposed to be the slide all about that section. So sort of map of how things looked, I think, in the 1920s, with various places that kind of come up in the story. So, just because it's a bit of a challenge to find doesn't mean you don't try. So a few years ago, I was down another internet hole looking, at this time at about 1 a.m, and I was trying to find my grandmother's family because I had a little bit more information about that. But it is really difficult because you're trying to look for a family in a place that doesn't really exist as it was at the time, in a language that you can't speak, in words that have a variety of spellings when they get translated into English, and records that are very hard to access if they do still exist. But it was about 1 a.m, and I stumbled on this group on the internet that had her name, and it said Haifa. And so I sent them a message, and I said, basically said, hi, I think I might be related to you. My grandmother's name is Marie, and she was born in Haifa around 1915. And then I went to sleep, and then I woke up at about 6 a.m, and I had a message, and it said, oh God, sorry, I need to remember. If I don't keep clicking this, please remind me. So this was the message I sent them. It was just like, hi, I think I might be related to you. This is my grandmother's name. She was born in Haifa around 1915. I went to sleep, and I woke up in the morning, and I had a message, and it said, hello, Madhu, welcome to the family. And then it said, have a look at the family book. And it said, if I have it right, she's on page sort of 173, and we're second cousins. And then at this point, I nearly died of shock. And was just like, oh my God, I actually, I completely can't believe this. Like, I actually, surely not. Surely I haven't found them, finally. But it was really interesting because it turned out that this family, so the Palestinian side of the family, actually had a 180-page family book. They also had a website. They had an extensive family tree that went back hundreds of years, and some films made about them by a Dutch filmmaker. And finally, they had this completely crazy sounding family origin story that involved a shipwreck, a pasha, and some wrestling. That just sounds, sounds complete. So shipwreck, pasha, and some wrestling. Again, you can see it if you're in the VR, which sounds completely unbelievable, but apparently is true. So now I kind of had more information than I thought I would ever really be in possession of. But I still felt like a bit of a tourist. I felt like I didn't really know anything. And then it sort of struck me that we have different ways of knowing things. And I wanted to dig into that a little bit with the project. And also I think VR is a really interesting space for kind of knowledge transfer and how we can know things, how we kind of communicate knowledge or experience knowledge. And we have different ways of knowing. So sometimes these are called sort of epistemologies of the North and epistemologies of the South. And epistemologies of the North tends to be the way that we learn, especially in the West. And it's kind of knowing as proving. It's knowing by studying things, by being good at research, by remembering all the facts about something, by being able to list them in order, by being able to debate them when we get asked. And we sort of think that when we know something, then we own it. We map things and we claim them, and knowledge becomes this kind of form of power and form of status. And alternatively, we have epistemologies of the South, and this is more kind of knowledge that is passed down. It's oral histories, it's knowing as feeling, it's knowing as kind of being, just being, gently being something. And it's knowledge as this kind of sensory, inalienable part of you. And I think sometimes when you're in the diaspora of like a set of different cultures and contested histories or histories that get contested, there's often a feeling that you have to know in order to be able to kind of prove something. And I decided with this project I was going to completely reject that, and I just wanted to focus on this idea of how we can know through feeling, how we can know through oral histories and sensory environments in order to kind of create that space. And VR is really amazing for this because you can build these environments that focus on how you can know something through feeling it, how you can know through mood, how you can know through emotion, and using these sensory elements to essentially see if we can pass down knowledge. So I started trying to piece together then the stories based on the information that I had. And part of this involved researching into places that I'd never been to sort of get a sense of how people lived and what that sensory environment might be like, and how to then build these sensory environments in virtual reality in a way that kind of combines storytelling and sound, like spatial sound all around you, interaction, how you move through the space, colour and mood, to see if I could really use VR as like a method of travel, to create spatial memories of places that I hadn't been. So I had this idea that the audience might start in a room in our family home in Haifa, and then they might adventure through this room into different scenes in the story. And the room would function a little bit like Narnia, and it would be full of objects that would represent both sides of the family. So even though it was in Palestine, it would have things in it that also represented Armenian history. And so you start in this room, and then through the room you can currently go into 3 different scenes. So when the talk is finished, maybe each person can pick one and watch that one, and I'll go through them now. So the first scene is called The Shipwreck, and the shipwreck is set in Acre in the 1700s, and it tells the story of how my grandmother's family got their name. And so earlier on I mentioned that this was like, it's a shipwreck, it's a pasha, and it's some wrestling. And when I sort of first heard this story, I didn't know who the pasha was, it didn't say. And so I was doing lots of research, and there was a sort of this choice between 2 pashas, and one of them was born in the region of Palestine, and another one was a Bosnian man who'd sort of worked his way up through the ranks of the Ottoman army and had eventually been promoted to be the Pasha of Acre, and he was called Ahmed Pasha al-Jazar, which I believe Jazar means butcher in Arabic. And he also apparently defeated Napoleon about 30 years after the story is set. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. So it's sort of finding these tiny nuggets of information and then seeing how much you can dive into them to then flesh out what you're trying to create. So you, like, I know it's a pasha, but I don't know which one. Okay, there's 2, which one could it be? And then the family name is an Egyptian Arabic word, and he lived in Egypt for quite some time. So I was like, okay, it's most probably going to be him. And then I was looking to reconstruct the palace that he lived in, but it doesn't exist anymore in the way that it was, and it's quite hard to find records of it. And I got completely obsessed with finding stuff, and this whole project has really been sort of going on a treasure hunt through your own history. And it's sort of like, it's this kind of feeling that's quite similar to when you're looking for a jumper on eBay, and you know that the perfect jumper is there, but it's probably going to be on page like 82, and you just have to keep going, and then you'll find it. And this has kind of been the process of this project. So eventually I found where the palace was, and I also found other information about him buried somewhere in a document on the internet. It said that he really loved gardening, so I filled the palace with plants. So taking some liberties, maybe a little, but kind of really trying to bring as much historical accuracy as possible to these environments within this kind of beautiful, fantastical world. The second scene is called A Family Who Lost a Child, and this is set in Aleppo in 1915. And it's a story of 2 Armenian families, one of which is mine, caught up in the events of the Armenian genocide during the last days of the Ottoman Empire. And it tells historical events through the lens, really sort of the lens of family, but it also explores humanity in the face of disaster, and it explores what it means to witness, what it means for us to witness in situations of really extreme violence, and how circumstances in those situations kind of create this choice between whether we just witness, whether we intervene, often at great personal risk, or whether we just stand to the side and we do nothing. And the scene places the audience in the centre of an old khan in Aleppo, and really asks, it's quite a powerful scene, it asks them not to look away while all these things are happening and unfolding around them. And then The third scene is called Chance Encounters, and it's set in Haifa in the 1930s. And it tells a curious story of how the two sides of the family came together, and it involves a prince, a chisel, and a beautiful pair of legs. And this one involved a lot of archival research into old photographs, and the sound changes as you move along the street. So again, it's kind of the great thing about VR is you've got the visuals, you've got yourself in there as like a body within the space, but you've also got this ability to play with sound, like both kind of ambient sound that might be there, and that adds a lot of richness to it, and also like linear pieces of music, linear storytelling, if you want to. Again, kind of thinking about space in a very sensory way and knowledge in a very sensory way. So I also wanted to talk a bit about the project as it's been built so far, and some of the methods that I used to research it. And it was actually the first thing I've ever made in VR. So when I started it, I didn't know whether it would work. I didn't know whether I would be able to effectively make anything. And I didn't know whether it would kind of work for what I was really trying to get it to do. But in the end, it has felt like a really effective way to engage with cultural heritage and kind of sit inside histories. So this is, again, like another shot of the room that you start in, and I wanted it to just feel really kind of warm and cozy and peaceful and earthy, and somewhere that I could just, put the headset on and almost just spend time in it if I wanted to. But because I didn't have any images of where my close family lived, either in Palestine or in Zayton, the research involved quite a few different methods to try and piece it together. And as it's hard to travel to lots of places in the story, I resorted to what I call digital entering. And this is making use of contemporary technologies and combining these with archival images to sort of explore different areas and to try and understand what once was and how things in relation to also how things look now. And within doing both of those things, you can search for these echoes and evidence of existence kind of within the context of the present, and how that still exists in the present tends to tell you quite a lot about how and why it's not there anymore, I would say. So this, I believe, on that side of the screen is old images of Zayton, and this is what it looks like now from going on certain spots on Google Maps. You can also look at it from above, but you can't zoom in that far. It's a little frustrating because, unlike with London, you can't just put the little yellow man and go for a walk in that particular place. You can do that in Israel if you want to, but in Zayton you can't. But it does have certain spots that you can go and you can kind of look around. And it was interesting to me because the houses that you see here look, it's hard to tell how old they are, but they look like they're quite a similar sort of building style to the ones at the top. And then these older kind of fountains and things. So now that I'd met some people in the family group that I'd found on the internet, I now knew the location of some of the places that the family lived in Haifa. And so I went on some walks on Google Maps to have a look around the area. And this was really interesting because a lot of like these echoes, these original houses are still there. But it didn't bring me very much closer to being able to reconstruct the interiors. So I had to find some alternative methods of research. And obviously it's a lot harder to go there and like sneak in around the back like I did with my mum in New Zealand. So instead of doing that, I resorted to digital entering again, and I went on Airbnb. And Airbnb, as it turns out, is an amazing way to see inside people's homes. So, and the homes in Haifa were really beautiful. And in the pictures, there's lots of little details. So I looked at loads and loads and loads of them, and there's lots of little details which I believe to be original from when they were built, around the time that my family was there. And I found it really helpful to sort of try and describe what I was seeing and see what that description could then tell me about how people lived. So this is just an image of the windows in an Airbnb that I found. And I kind of fell in love with the windows, to be honest. And so just describing them, it says, large and often rounded at the top with multiple segmented ways of opening. So if you look at this window, it's got 4 parts that you can actually open. With metal hinges to let cool sea air flow through the house. The windows are divided into smaller panes, some straight, some curved, referencing older Arab architecture with a slight air of Art Deco. The panes are often clear, but sometimes coloured or textures, with the exteriors clear or covered with decorative metal grills. So just from like picking one thing inside a house and thinking about what materials it's made out of and how it like affects how people live there, you can kind of start getting this really interesting sense of why it was built like that and what that means about the environment that people live in. And then I also noticed that the flooring in loads of these rooms was really beautiful, and there was like these kind of tile patterns that kept coming up over and over again. And then I went down this whole researching these tiles, and it turned out that they were kind of ubiquitous in urban homes in Palestine in the 1920s and 30s. And because I was in the family WhatsApp group by this point, I messaged a picture of these tiles to the family group, and I got sent back this image which is of one of the extended family's members' houses that she'd managed to go back and go into. And this was amazing. And it was also amazing because my original degree is in textile design. So I have this absolute love of anything that's patterned. And these floor tiles end up being the tiles that are on the floor in the room that you start in. So it's kind of amazing to bring as many aspects that you can kind of into this space, and then think about how that can give you spatial memories, essentially. And then this was followed up by more images of her house. So I was on a bit of a roll by this point. And so the combination of like these oral histories, these methods of digital entering, and these sort of archival images or family photographs were really helpful for being able to create the project. But it was also really interesting because finding photos of interiors is just really hard, because people at the time weren't really taking that many photos, and they definitely weren't mostly taking photos of interior spaces. So it became this process of kind of zooming in on all of these grainy pictures to details that maybe the photographer didn't think were important, but I was just kind of craving. So there's some really unusual wallpaper. There's like palm plants, there's a piano, there's this upholstery, there's bits of wooden furniture. You can kind of see the windows and the doorways and how that space is set up. And it's been really lovely to sort of bring these things back to life, especially as they're kind of being erased. And although the room that you start in is in Haifa, I did want to combine it with bring in some things that might represent aspects of the Armenian side of the family. And so the room itself is full of lots of sort of little Easter eggs that when people know things, they'll know what it is. And if they don't know, they'll probably just think it's a nice pattern. So the rug on that side is the Goha rug, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. It's a very famous Armenian rug and has kind of appeared and disappeared throughout history from the research that I did. But it's this rug, this is the rug that ends up kind of carrying you almost as this magic carpet through the project. And then on the other side is some Armenian pottery from Jerusalem by the Balian family. And this kind of inspired some of the patterns that I was using for pottery that again is in that room in the project. And people yeah, it's interesting because people, as I said, when they watch it, they find different things that are meaningful to them. And I showed it to one person who thought that one of so there's also on the walls in the room, there's my grandfather's paintings. So I've scanned them and then I've put them into VR. And in real life, they're really big and quite intense and live under my sofa because my flat is quite small. But it's been really nice to kind of bring them out and put them into this digital space and kind of preserve them in that way. But I showed it to somebody not that long ago and he was completely convinced that one of the sea paintings is of Lake Tiberias. I don't know how he knows that, but he's convinced that it is, and he also thinks one of the other illustrations is from the Magic Flute, which I wasn't aware of. So it's just a really nice, sharing this project has been this really nice kind of bringing together and promoting of conversation with different people. And also I would say that the project is kind of ongoing, and what I would really like is that every time you come back into this room, maybe the room changes a little bit. So if there's kind of objects that you think might work well in the space that represent more of the Armenian side of the family, it would be really nice.
And do you have pictures of maybe couples, yes?
Yeah.
Can we see now?
There's one at the end. There's one at the end. So it's just been really interested kind of showing it to people and really thinking of like home as this place of stories. Like homes aren't just places that we live in, they're these containers of stories and they're these containers of histories, and we're living in a time where there is a very wholesale destruction of people's homes, and I think it's really important to just remember, like, when we see homes that have been completely turned into rubble or have been destroyed, that they are actually like, there are so many stories contained in those places, and to try and see through that and remember that, really. So that's the end of the talk. These are my grandparents.
One of them pictures that's this one.
Yes, it is.
In this side.
Yeah. Those are my grandparents.
Thank you very much. You know that the Turks have changed the name of Zeytun now to something else?
Yeah, it's called...
Suleiman.